Thank you very much, Ambassador, Secretary General, for setting the scene, for providing the context, describing the objectives of today. I have now the honor to introduce the keynote speaker, Dr. Gernot Erler, who is the Special Representative of the Federal Government of Germany for the OSCE Chairmanship 2016. Since 2014, he's also coordinator for intersocietal cooperation with Russia, Central Asia, and the Eastern Partnership countries. He is a former Minister of State at the German Federal Foreign Office and member of the German Bundestag since 1987. Dr. Erler, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Lieber Lamberto, dear Paul,
Lamberto, Paul, ladies and gentlemen, ministers, your excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I may now also welcome you in the name of the OSCE Chairmanship 2016 in Germany here most cordially, and I'm glad to see that so many of you have honored the invitation of the OSCE Secretary General to this special format of the Security Days in Berlin. I would also like to thank our German cooperation partners, the Friedrich Ebert and the Konrad Adenauer Foundations, without whom this event would not have been possible. Ladies and gentlemen, over the last recent days, the attention in the whole of Europe and also here in the political part of Berlin was not really that much directed towards the OSCE, probably a little bit more towards the UEFA and the Euro 2016. And of course there was a lot of attention for the EU referendum in the United Kingdom. Now, yesterday, the British voters have cast their votes, and today we have the sad certainty that the Brexit won and that Great Britain will leave the EU. This is a black day for Europe, for a grand idea, but also for many outside of the European Union who were banking on this idea and who still want to rely on this very idea. There are many different things that we still need to resolve in the EU. The aftermath of the financial crisis 2008-2010, there is Greece. Then there is the issue of the refugees and also the connection to the question of European solidarity, the conflict with Russia and the Ukraine crisis. A strong EU is in demand more than ever, one could say. But now a weakened EU has to try and tackle all of these different tasks. Now, in this difficult situation, we should not give any room to doubt. The EU will remain our political framework for the future of Europe. The European integration over the last 70 years has decidedly contributed to peace and stability in Europe. The EU will remain the most important orientation framework and will remain that in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, the OSCE and the European Union, with a view to their institutional status quo and their current state of affairs, also with a view to the members or, how well known they are, they may differ in these respects, but both these institutions have one thing in common, and that we should not forget today. The European Union and the OSCE were and are grand and great cooperative projects for securing peace in Europe and beyond. The founding of these two institutions was a reaction to different experiences and challenges. Two important days of commemoration that remind us of the early history of the EU and the OSCE actually coincide with today's date. Today, 100 years ago, on the 24th of June 1916, a 1 week of murderous, relentless shelling started the Battle of the Somme, which in little over a few months claimed more than 1 million lives, most of which were lost by soldiers of the British Empire. With the First World War, the old political order of the European continent broke into pieces, but at the same time, the regional order in North Africa, in the Middle East, and in Central Asia also went into decline, and the effects can still be felt today. The European project of unification that started in 1951 with the founding of the European Community for Coal and Steel was a reaction based on reason, a reaction to the devastation of both world wars, and especially with a view to the murderous aggression that twice emanated from Germany in different ways during the 20th century. This path of the European unification has gifted us with a 70-year period of peace, which is a unique experience on the European continent, an experience that has now become something of a normalcy for the post-war generations, and which is something that they almost take for granted. But peace is not something to be taken for granted. We need to work to secure peace every day, and the path towards peace is also a very difficult one. Over decades, we guaranteed peace with a balance of nuclear terror, and we paid with a lot of human suffering. And we Germans know what we're talking about, especially here in the city of Berlin that was divided for so long. Exactly 68 years ago, the almost 1-year blockade of Western Berlin started, which led to the final demise of the alliance between East and West that was forged in the Second World War, and that almost then later, during the Cold War, almost led to a renewed military confrontation with unforeseeable effects. Ladies and gentlemen, the world was spared this disaster back then, but it was still a long way to go until we achieved a stable order of peace in Europe that was not based on the balance of nuclear destructive forces. Almost at the same time, with the beginning of the European integration in the 50s, there were first initiatives for a pan-European peace and security order, including the countries of Central and Eastern Union and the Soviet Union. Only after years of tough negotiations and a relentless search for compromises by very committed persons, and after numerous diplomatic initiatives, and also because of the contracts with the Eastern European countries, was it possible that the East and the West could agree in 1975 on the cornerstones of such a basic order in the Helsinki Final Act. This, ladies and gentlemen, has remained the method of the CSCE and later the OSCE. Ongoing dialogue leads to a transparency of different sets of interests, and this shall help balance the situation, create confidence and trust, and help to avoid conflicts or to peacefully resolve them. Ever since the Final Act of Helsinki, the European security order is based on very basic principles that the participating states agreed upon in a consensus and have underlined time and again. Part of this are the inviolability of the borders, the non-violence and mutual relationships, the respect of human rights and basic rights, and the cooperation in questions of security, the economy, and the environment. But the European or the pan-European security order also, ever since 1990, comprise the regimes of conventional arms control and the measures for creating trust and confidence, which led to the destruction of tens of thousands of pieces of heavy armament in Europe and helped to promote trust and transparency, and with that, the security of us all. Ladies and gentlemen, the KSCE process helped to open a constant dialogue between the East and West that helped to create more confidence and to do away with misunderstandings, and with that also helped to enable to finally end the Cold War in a peaceful manner. The OSCE was an accompanying force in the states of Central and Eastern Europe on their path towards democracy and the rule of law. And since its inception, it managed to help negotiate interests in many domestic conflicts and conflicts between states, and it's still doing it today. And it's also making a very important contribution as a platform for dialogue when it comes to coping with new transnational challenges like, for example, international terrorism or cyber security or the questions of migration and refugees. Without the OSCE, and I'm personally convinced of that, without the OSCE, during these times of the most pressing security policy crisis on the European continent, and that is the crisis in and around Ukraine, without the OSCE today we would have even fewer chances to come to a political conclusion and would have to lament even more lives lost. At the same time, we would not have an independent and recognized mechanism for determining breaches of the ceasefires in the East Ukraine, as we managed to establish with the Special Monitoring Mission of the OSCE, and we wouldn't either have a well-functioning structure for the political processes as we now have with the three trilateral working group and the four-party groups in Minsk. The Minsk Agreement are still the only roadmap, represent the only roadmap towards peace in Ukraine. And within this framework, it is that we will have to work together. We still have a lot of work to do. We have to achieve that the ceasefire, which is still breached time and again, will become more stable. And we have to also think about how it can be made possible to actually call those to account who breach these ceasefire. But these efforts are being targeted with threats and also targeted attacks, apparently, to the participants of the Special Monitoring Mission, which we consider to be totally unacceptable. Part of this is also the shooting down of 2 drones of the SMN over the last 2 weeks. Those who are responsible for these kinds of attacks and impediments need to be determined and need to be called to account. And let me repeat that only on the basis of a stable ceasefire will it be possible to have regional elections in Ukraine. The negotiations about this are still very complicated, but far from impossible. We could say similar things about the conflict in the region of Nagorno-Karabakh. Here, the OSCE, after the latest eruption of military violence at the beginning of April, helped to de-escalate the situation. But still, way too many victims have to be lamented, as well as breaches of the ceasefire around the contact line. And again, in this conflict, it is the OECD that is the only independent and recognized party which is working for transparency and for the creation of trust in order to help avert further suffering from those who are affected. A sustainable solution is hardly conceivable without the OECD anyway. A sustainable solution of this conflict, as I said. But, of course, such negotiations are by no means an easy business, and we need sufficient funds and resources, which is why we, as the board, quite concretely advocated an increase of staff of the team of the specially commissioned, or the Special Commissioner for the region, Ambassador Kaprzyk, and we hope that those who are responsible will all work together here. Ladies and gentlemen, the OSCE is today faced with massive challenges, and Roberto Zanni just described that. And probably the biggest challenges ever since the Cold War. The OSCE shows through their commitment and their achievement in the aforementioned conflicts, and on top of that, in their everyday work, it shows that it is indispensable and that it is still capable of action, and quite impressively so. But we also need to state that the basic consensus of Helsinki, which was then expanded based on the Charter of Paris for a new Europe in 1990, and was then again underlined with the final declaration of Astana, that this is all now actually falling victim to a creeping process of erosion. I would like to mention 4 central areas where I think that this threat is becoming ever more apparent. First of all, the basic principles of the European security order, as for example the inviolability of borders, the non-violence in international relationships, and the respect of the interior and the exterior sovereignty of neighboring states, have been violated in recent times in ways that were not conceivable even after 1975 in the darkest times of the Cold War. Secondly, the violation of these basic principles of our security have destroyed a lot of trust that was erected over long years, and that means it is a burden for the cooperation of the member states when it comes to facing challenges and pressing problems of our present times, as, for example, in the field of the necessary modernization of our instruments for disarmament and arms control, or when it comes to fighting international terrorism, when it comes to dealing with migration flows and large numbers of refugees, and also in the task of the building of an economic network in the OSCE area. The basic consensus, as a third point, the basic consensus that such security order is in the interest of sustainable stability and needs to be based on the respect of basic human rights and civil rights. This is something that no longer seems to be something that people accept as natural. Under the impression of terrorist attacks and other security threats, both in the analog world as well as in cyberspace, it seems to be that those are really gaining momentum, that claim that security and the respect of human rights cannot be had at the same time. But this, of course, is a massive mistake. And although in the OSCE we have meetings of representatives of the member states on an almost daily basis, and with that have a singular opportunity for a meaningful and inclusive dialogue on eye level, this dialogue, at least according to my impression, is not really taking place the way it should. We sometimes rather see something like speechlessness clad in so many words. In many sessions and conferences, we assure each other that we are ready for a real dialogue and that we still feel committed to the basic principles of the OSCE. But these words are way too rarely followed up with concrete deeds and actions. Ladies and gentlemen, how to react to the breach of these principles, to the loss of trust, and how do we react to the putting in question of the comprehensive concept of security that also comprises legal security and the security of rights and liberties? Well, a basic insight of the KSCE process was that a sustainable and mutual security in Europe cannot be based on military strength alone, but rather on trust and cooperation. And today, again, it's true that we have to carry on our dialogue and we have to deepen our dialogue, not in spite of, but because of our conflicts and differences of opinion. Germany, quite deliberately, assumed responsibility in the OSCE in order to strengthen this unique organization as a platform for such a dialogue. We want to try and avoid further alienation and a further loss of trust on all sides. But for that, it is necessary that we return to respecting rules that were agreed upon and do not only appeal to others to de-escalate and to create more confidence, and I'm saying this also in this specific situation, but that we should also try and respect these rules ourselves and act accordingly. As the chairmanship of the OSCE, we advocate the fact that we should focus more on what we have in common faced with the numerous global challenges. The subject that the Secretary General of the OSCE now presented to us, together with our cooperation partners of the Friedrich Ebert and Konrad Adenauer Foundation, actually describe these most pressing challenges quite well. The compatibility of security with the protection of human rights, basic freedoms and democratic standards, also in the field of fighting international terrorism or in the effort to cope with international migration and the flow of refugees, but also in the field of adapting our way, how we create trust in the military area, and how we adapt that to today's challenges and to the necessities of new initiatives in order to avoid dangerous incidents and inadvertent escalations. We also need to improve the economic connectivity in the OSCE area instead of trying to increase the competition between the different integrational projects. And we have to strengthen our cooperation with a view to the most pressing global threats to our security, because we can only react to them efficiently together. Ladies and gentlemen, we should not forget that with a view to these threats, and also against the backdrop of the many challenges of our time, that cooperative cooperation really is necessary, more necessary perhaps than ever since the beginning of the European integration process and the policy of détente. But still, in the case of the OSCE, it is now mainly the voices from outside who recognize the value and the achievements of the OSCE more clearly than ourselves, perhaps, when it comes to security and cooperation. The OSCE has not yet received the Nobel Peace Prize, and so the EU still is ahead of us there. And as far as I know, the OSCE was also not yet praised by the Pope, but that may still happen. At the OSCE, especially in these times of worldwide crises and instabilities, is met with a lot of interest, where grown and tested structures and principles of a cooperative security order do not exist, and where violent conflicts are a thing of everyday lives, or at least appear to be possible very easily. And that is why we should, when meeting here in Berlin, that as hardly any other city was at the very center of world wars, of the Cold War, but also the policy of détente, the fall of the wall, and European integration. So it is here in this city that we should especially be reminded of the importance of the OSCE when it comes to the prosperity and security of Europe, and we should try to go on writing history into the future. Thank you very much for your attention.
Sehr vielen Dank, Dr. Erler.
Thank you, Dr.
Ich
Erler.
glaube, das kann ich sagen im
I
Namen
think that
from everybody present.
in the name of everybody present here,
You started with giving your views on the current situation. You used the words schwarzen Tag, a dark day, referring to Brexit. I think it was very important you provided the historical context, starting from 100 years ago. It's crucial to always maintain the historical perspective. I wouldn't dare trying even to summarize the many things you mentioned, you inspired us with, but let me mention just two things that I take back personally. One is that, and it cannot be said often enough, peace cannot be taken for granted and needs to be worked on day by day, and you gave many illustrations. And the second is that the OSCE method of sustained dialogue and the search for common answers remains the right approach, especially so in these very challenging times. And you provided many examples why that is so. And lastly, I hope the media pick up your kind words about the Nobel Peace Prize for the OSCE. Ladies and gentlemen, we then go to the next part of the program.